Hello again, and thank you for continuing to follow this podcast. My name is Michael Paul Hurd. I am the owner of Lineage Independent Publishing and author of my Lineage series of historical fiction novels. Welcome to the 7th episode of the series. In this podcast, I am going to talk about the setting for Uncertain Alliances, Lineage Series Book 7, which was published in March of 2022. This episode is recorded, but I still invite you to ask questions or make comments in the appropriate interface on Facebook, YouTube, or Substack, and I will respond as soon as possible. Uncertain Alliances is set primarily during what Americans call the French and Indian War, which took place from 1754 to 1763. In Europe, it is known as the 7 Years' War, coinciding with Britain's declaration of war on France, running from 1756 to 1763. It should be noted that the North American view of the war was that it was totally separate from any European conflict. I chose Litchfield, Connecticut as the setting for this book because of the genealogical connections, starting with my 8th great-grandfather, Benjamin Hurd, who lived from 1666 to 1754. The main male character in the story, Richard Harris, served as a militia captain, a church deacon, and a village magistrate, a composite of Benjamin Hurd's descendants. Of course, it was not unusual for educated men of the period to engage in multiple professions simultaneously, as did Richard Harris. Harris's best friend is a Mohegan tribal leader, Benjamin Uncas, whose band had adopted European dress, converted to the Presbyterian version of Christianity, and spoke primarily English, but still maintained their native culture and heritage. The two men shared frequent games of chess as well as their deepest thoughts and emotions. Chess was the inspiration for the book's cover, as well as several of the chapter titles. As the story opens, Litchfield was near the western frontier of the Connecticut colony. That placed the westernmost settlements at risk of tribal raids. It is in response to one of those raids that the colonial governor calls up the militia and assigns the now Captain Harris with a mission to root out and engage Abenaki raiders, one of whom is captured and interrogated. From this interrogation, Harris and his militiamen, with Benjamin Uncas's son David as their scout and interpreter, learn that the raids were actually being conducted by a group of French marauders who were taking women and children captive with plans of selling them into slavery. Eventually, rival Mohegan and Abenaki tribes band together with the white English settlers to root out the French marauders and rescue a group of children who had been taken by the French in an earlier false flag raid on a frontier village. As plans are made, the dichotomy of English and Native American cultures becomes a learning opportunity for everyone involved, and one Mohegan even questions why they would risk Mohegan blood to rescue settler children. His mother explains that the children were taken dishonorably, leaving it unsaid that the rescue was the right thing to do. As time passes, the colonies are on a war footing and ready to fight the French and Indian coalitions. In the early stages of the conflict, a young officer of the Virginia militia, Lieutenant Colonel George Washington, establishes Fort Necessity in what is now Fayette County, Pennsylvania. As part of the story, New York and Connecticut militiamen are sent to support the fort, which Washington ultimately loses to the French. The surrender document, written in French and signed by Washington, allegedly contained a confession that he had personally murdered the French commander. Washington later asserted that he did not speak French and would not have signed the document if he had known it contained the false confession. The stories of the main characters and their families become intimately intertwined with the personalities and battles of the war. In addition to George Washington, they cross paths with Rogers Rangers, British generals Abercrombie and Howe, and support the battles of Forts Edward, William Henry, and Carillon, which was eventually renamed as Fort Ticonderoga. Eventually, Harris and his men return to Litchfield and march proudly into the village, despite not actually having engaged in combat. Eventually, the combined colonial militia and British regulars drive the French north across the St. Lawrence River and lay siege to Quebec City and Montreal. A decisive battle of the war, fought on the Plains of Abraham near Quebec City, brought the losses of the French commander Marquis de Montcalm and British General Wolfe. Interpersonal relationships and conflicting European and Native American morals play a very important role in the story, especially in the camaraderie between the main male characters. Richard Harris and Benjamin Uncas share the most personal details of their lives, including the laudanum addiction of Harris's wife, Sarah, following the loss of twin infants, and what we now know as postpartum depression. Meanwhile, Uncas and his second wife had not been able to have a baby, which under Mohegan custom was grounds for divorce. That led the town gossips to spread all sorts of rumors. The story's evocative ending covers a broad range of emotions, from happiness to grief. I'll stop the description right there in hopes that you are interested enough to purchase the book. It's available in paperback, e-reader, and audiobook formats through retailers and in e-reader format from many library services. Over the past few minutes, I've provided the historical context and an overview of the storyline for Uncertain Alliances, the seventh novel in my Lineage series. As a point of information, the Lineage series does not have to be read sequentially, as each book is a standalone, perhaps with an Easter egg or two linking it to other books in the series. There are currently 10 books in the series, and the 11th, Take the Long Way Home, is on the way. A release is planned for sometime early in 2025. For Lineage Independent Publishing, I'm Michael Paul Hurd. Thanks for watching.